This exciting episode, we've got a heated property dispute when a river refuses to stay put. Plus, there's surveying shenanigans, mysterious oil deals, and J. Pat O'Malley as a desert rat who can't keep his story straight. Also, the end is nigh for poor David Gideon. It's Perry Mason, Season 5, Episode 15, The Case of the Roving River. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose, pretty simple, provide an audio companion to every episode of television's greatest legal drama, Perry Mason. Each episode, we give you a summary of the plot. We even compare plots with the Earl Stanley Gardner novel if the episode was an adaptation. We give you a little trivia, reveal the episode's theme, then revel in a Perry proverb, that's a pearl of wisdom from the man himself, before we head to the water cooler where, just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can discuss the ins and outs of our fave legal cruise adventures. But first, say it with me, to the Law Library! Each episode in the Law Library, we examine a legal conundrum from the episode to find courtroom precedents for future cases. This episode's legal lesson involves the distinction between meander lines and boundary lines in property surveys. Perry Mason presents an intriguing property dispute that actually gets the fundamentals of riparian law, those are laws related to the banks of a river, mostly right.
Mr. Mason, this meander or expressed boundary line, how do you prove which it was?
Well, it's a question of intent. The success or failure of your lawsuit will depend upon the testimony of the surveyor.
Meander lines are indeed different from boundary lines, and this distinction matters enormously in water-adjacent property disputes. They were historically used by surveyors to approximate the general course of a river without mapping every twist and turn, a common practice in the U.S. public land survey system. The episode also gets right that when rivers naturally change course through accretion, property rights can be affected. The California Civil Code Section 1014 does specify that gradual additions to land along a river or stream belong to the owner of the adjacent land. However, the show takes some creative liberties. It suggests that the type of survey line, that is meander versus boundary, determines whether a property owner gets rights to accreted land. In reality, the distinction isn't that neat. Under both federal and California law, the general presumption is property on a river extends to the water's edge, regardless of whether the original survey used a meander or boundary line. And the Supreme Court established this principle in a case from 1868, which held that meander lines are primarily for surveys. They don't limit ownership rights. Now, let's get to the full plot of this episode. The Case of the Roving River. Manzana Valley, USA. Come experience the familial strife caused by riverbank accretion. Let's meet the central players in our drama. Judy Bryant, a determined woman fighting to protect what's rightfully hers.
It isn't a case of misunderstanding, it's a case of theft. You're trying to steal my property and I won't let you. Do you understand? I won't let you get away with it.
Neil Gilbert, her would-be boyfriend.
I told you on the way up. It's finished between us.
Because you don't still care for me, or because you're afraid to stand up to your mother?
Matt Lambert, Judy's uncle and successful valley developer.
Are you in any kind of financial difficulty, Mr. Lambert?
Trouble? Oh, not really. A little overextended, perhaps, but nothing very serious.
Desert rat Seth Tyson, the Elmer Fudd of the Old West.
I'd like you to meet Manzana Valley's one and only true celebrity, a real desert rat, Seth Tyson.
Now, look here, young fella. You don't woke me up with some tomfool nonsense about worthless real estate?
Cloris Bryant, Judy's mother. Amos Bryant, Judy's deadbeat stepdad, and the surveyor upon whose testimony rests some serious cash.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me remember. Susie. Sure, that's it, Susie. How are you, baby?
No.
Mr. Drake,
Don't worry. I'll leave orders to have it filled. The next time you see your stepdaughter, her name's Judy, not Susie.
And finally, Harvey Farrell, the developer whose construction plans spark the initial conflict.
You went out then, Mr. Farrell?
Yes, I decided to drive out along the river and take another look at the site of the resort I had planned to build. Such a beautiful, clear night.
As our episode begins, Judy discovers developer Harvey is preparing to build on land she thinks is hers. So Judy consults Perry, and our hero has David Gideon explain that success hinges on proving whether or not Judy's stepfather, Surveyor Amos, used a meander or boundary line in his original survey.
David, you've looked over the documents. What's the disparity between the river and the survey line?
The river is more than 300 feet from the survey line.
Get a good long look at DG, folks. This is his second to last episode on the show. Paul Drake manages to track down Amos, but the family reunion turns sour quickly.
But I suppose if your debts were paid, you'd be able to testify. Even the truth has a price, hasn't it?
Well, winning that case could mean a lot of money to you, couldn't it?
What are you trying to tell me?
8 o'clock tomorrow night. Now, put the money in a box or wrap it so nobody will know what it is.
The plot thickens when Amos goes to collect his payoff from his daughter, and instead of finding $10K, finds a homemade bomb that turns this property dispute deadly. Old man Seth Tyson claims he helped Amos with the original survey. Well, is he gonna be a help to Perry in court? Ruh-roh.
You were in a hospital down in Los Angeles. Admitted the last week in February 1940.
Now, look here.
And not only didn't you help Amos Bryant, but you weren't even in the county. When that survey was made, you were getting a broken hip treated for 6 weeks in a hospital.
Perry discovers Matt Lambert recently bought mineral rights from old Seth. Matt? No!
I recently acquired a half interest in a group of mineral land leases for land that is rich in lime deposits. Now, a large chemical company is giving us $500,000 for the mining privileges. That's more than enough to tide me over. I'm working on closing the deal right now.
Mr. Lambert, your half interest in the mineral land leases, from whom was it purchased?
Why, from Seth Tyson.
Paul fixes bow tie befuddles, as is its wont.
Judy Bryant was enticed by the possibility of a $250,000 sale of her property. But one man could ruin that sale. A man who would either lie or tell the truth only in relation to the amount of money he was paid to do so. And heaven only knows how large a share of the $250,000 Amos Bryant would have ultimately demanded.
But when Perry dedicates himself to grilling Seth, he finds out he's got some splaining to do. Was he or was he not in a hospital bed for the original survey?
I checked deeper into those old Los Angeles hospital records. You were admitted February 1940 for a treatment of an old hip break that had to be reset. You were discharged April 1940. It's true. That's what the records show. But it's also true, as one of the old nurses and a former resident at the hospital will testify, that you were permitted to leave the hospital before your hip was put in a cast for a period of 10 days.
Turns out Seth murdered Pete Starkey back in 1940. That's Judy's dad. And then when Amos Bryant reappeared, Seth feared his scheme would be exposed.
I heard Amos blackmailing the girl, so I knew how, when, and where she was going to pay him off. I watched her from then on. Now, making that bomb and changing it for the box of money out on the golf course, that was easy.
In our denouement, the property dispute gets resolved with Judy and Mother Chloris partnering with Harvey to develop the land.
Land is unquestionably yours, Miss Bryant. This agreement Mr. Mason drew up not only compensates you adequately, but also, in a very real sense, makes you my partner.
The property doesn't belong to me. It belongs to my mother.
But your mother wanted the agreement in both your names, Judy.
Mother, what am I going to do with you?
And don't worry about Carl Held, a.k.a. David Gideon. Sarah Marshall, the actress who portrayed Judy in this episode, became his wife 3 years later. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is a deep dive on an actor or actress who guest starred in the episode. And finally, a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul prompt takes us deep into California's water history. Our prompt: which California rivers would have been most contentious for property rights cases between 1850 and 1961? Were there any rivers that significantly changed course and generated legal battles over accretion rights and boundary disputes? I would take a gander at the Sacramento River, the San Joaquin River, the Russian River. 3 possibilities. Tell us what you find, Pauls. Ardella, for this episode, focuses on Harry Carey Jr., a.k.a. District Ranger Frank Dean.
I'd like you to meet Manzana Valley's one and only true celebrity, a real desert rat, Seth Tyson.
We're just wild about Harry, so here's 10 about him. 1. Born Henry George Carey Jr., May 16, 1921, on his parents' 1,000-acre ranch near Saugus, California. Young Harry grew up immersed in Western culture. Father nicknamed Dobie because his red hair matched the color of the ranch's adobe bricks. His father, famous actor Harry Carey. Thanks to the many Navajo people who worked on the ranch, Harry Carey Jr. spoke Navajo before he spoke English. Number 2. During World War II, served in the Navy as a medical corpsman in the Pacific. Much to his frustration, transferred back to the States to work with John Ford, his father's close friend, in the Office of Strategic Services, helping create training and propaganda documentaries. Number 3, post-war, tried to forge his own path with a singing career. But his acting career took off when he appeared in Howard Hawks' Red River. John Wayne famously vouched for him, saying, "I don't know if Dobie can act, but he looks right." The film featured both Harry Jr. and his father, though they never shared a scene. Number 4, became a cornerstone of John Ford's legendary stock company, appeared in 7 Ford Westerns. Most memorable roles include tragic young soldier in The Searchers, the spirited Abilene Kid in 3 Godfathers. That was a film dedicated to his father's memory. Number 5, in Rio Grande, showcased his exceptional horsemanship, performing dangerous stunts alongside Ben Johnson, including the feat of riding 2 horses at once, standing with 1 foot on each horse's back. Number 6, between 1955 and 1957, endeared himself to a new generation as ranch counselor Bill Burnett in Disney's Spin and Marty serials on the Mickey Mouse Club. Number 7, as traditional westerns declined in Hollywood, he adapted, appeared in modern films like Gremlins, Back to the Future 3, and Tombstone. Number 8, 1994, published Company of Heroes, My Life as an Actor in the John Ford Stock Company. shared valuable insights into Hollywood's golden age of Westerns, and preserved stories about the legends he worked with. Number 9, 1944, married Marilyn Fix, daughter of actor Paul Fix, who was the DA in this episode, formed another successful Hollywood family connection that would last 7 decades. 4 children. Stephen died in 1989. Melinda, Thomas, and Patricia. And number 10, passed away December 27th, 2012 in Santa Barbara, age 91, one of the last surviving members of John Ford's stock company. Our Perry for this episode comes from Sheriff Vincent's warning to Perry about, quote, all sorts of shenanigans, which gives us fascinating insight into Perry Mason's reputation beyond Los Angeles.
They tell me all sorts of things happen in the murder trial in the big city. Things like, tampering with the evidence, some smart-alecky lawyer fussing with the witnesses. Well, just pulling all sorts of shenanigans. Wouldn't want that to happen up here, Mr. Mason. No, sir, I wouldn't like that at all.
The irony, of course, is that Vincent's warnings about Perry's tactics tell us more about the sheriff's own biases than about our favorite attorney's actual methods. Our theme for this episode is roving. Consider the physical roving alone in this episode. Fictional Rodera River has moved 300 feet from its original course. Seth Tyson wanders the Manzana Valley, spinning tales about the past. We see the theme of roving in the episode's family relationships too. Judy's father, Pete, roved the valley prospecting for gold. Stepfather Amos roamed away from his family responsibilities. And Matt Lambert, his fingers are roving to a new kind of transformation, hoping the valley will turn into something more controlled and contained. The episode suggests that when you try to impose rigid boundaries on nature, you're gonna fail. The river will rove where it will. And in the words of Amos, that's the prophet, not the surveyor. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Now it's time for a Perry proverb. Judy Bryant, having acted alone in trying to handle her stepfather's extortion attempt, is now facing the consequences of her isolation. Perry's proverb cuts to the heart of not just Judy's situation, but the human condition.
Judy, you're a young, attractive, and very nice girl who's made independence the prime thing in her life. Now, if this crazy world of ours isn't to become unglued, we'll all have to face our need for one another.
Perry isn't just telling Judy she needs a lawyer. He's teaching her about the delicate balance between independence and interdependence. In a case where characters keep trying to handle things on their own, Perry reminds us that justice requires us to work together. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
You know, there is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Every time we visit the water cooler, we give you deleted scenes. 3 bits that didn't quite make the episode's final cut. Number 1, after spending so much time debating meander lines versus boundary lines, Paul Fix's DA suggests solving property disputes by just asking whether or not rivers themselves can vote on where they want to go. Your Honor, the prosecution in this case believes it's just the democratic thing to do. Number 2, David Gideon shows no mercy to Judy on the golf course, beating her by 50 strokes, mercilessly mocking her short game while Judy weeps bitterly. And number 3, Paul uses Perry's lunch to demonstrate to Perry that he understands accretion. See, your sandwich represents the original riverbank, and these potato chips show the gradual buildup of sediment, and by the time Paul gets to using the coffee cup as a survey monument, he's eaten most of Perry's lunch. Our Paul prompt from the last episode involved top leasing, Walter Frazier's preferred method of right securing in the case of the unwelcome bride. We asked, what was the MO of real top leasers? Dad Drake was on the case. Quote, here's how top leasing worked. Companies would monitor the expiration dates of existing leases. A top lease would be executed to take effect immediately after the current lease expired. Landowners were approached early by oil companies offering incentives to secure top leases. The legality of top leasing depended on state laws and lease terms. Sometimes it led to legal disputes, especially if there was uncertainty over whether the original leaseholder had legacy rights. Geologic reports and seismic data were, by and large, kept highly confidential and shared only with trusted insiders, developed in-house by oil companies that employed their own teams of geologists and geophysicists to interpret data, avoiding external experts who might gab, and tightly controlled, especially written surveys and drilling results. The combination of technological advancements like seismic reflection methods and cutthroat competition intensified efforts to guard data. And finally, H.L. Hunt, a real-world person we included in our prompt. His strategies included using dummy companies or seemingly unrelated parties to do his bidding, similar to what Perry did for Sybil Granger in the case of the nervous accomplice. Developing secret codes to make information indecipherable should it fall into the wrong hands. Quick strikes using the first strategy, dominating a promising site but making it look like many unrelated parties were involved. The use of non-disclosure agreements that were strictly enforced. And leaking misleading information to competitors to disguise his real intentions. End quote. Thanks, Daddy-O. Now it's time for a listener letter. Unofficial pod legal counsel Tom Wiltshire hit us up with 2 letters. The first one detailed his trip to Argentina and a case of the guilty client's connection. Quote, I was viewing some pics I took in Buenos Aires last year and stumbled onto this pic of an O'Higgins statue. Being a Perry Pod fan, I immediately thought of the case of the guilty clients and Concepcion O'Higgins' seemingly ridiculous boast. I Googled the name plus Argentina. Turns out Bernardo O'Higgins was like the Thomas Jefferson of Latin American independence movements. Hung out in Argentina, Peru, Bolivia, London, Paris, and ruled Chile upon its independence. Traveled with the likes of Jose San Martin and Simon Bolivar. Is recognized throughout the world as a towering figure. I heartily commend his Wikipedia page as a fascinating read of the swath this man cut in history. Being an O'Higgins in Latin America must really be something to brag about. It appears the show writers were aiming at the heights of historical erudition, not just goofing around. Close quote. Then, Tom shared his thoughts on the case of the Roving River. Quote, the following deleted scene was inspired by watching ex-Navy frogman Bill Hopper outswim Olympian Tarzan Herman Bricks. Way to go, Paul! Dispirited after losing $10 a hole to golf hustler Seth Tyson, Paul challenges Seth to a swimming race. Paul, buoyed by his win over Matt Lambert, goes double or nothing against Seth. And in the deleted scene, Seth appears in a terrifying minuscule Speedo, poised poolside next to baggy trunks Paul. Just as Mason calls 3, 2, 1, start, Seth distracts Paul by saying, wow, look at that pretty girl, and beats the gawking Paul across the pool. Fun family facts, Carl Held and Sarah Marshall got married to each other July 12th, 1964. Here's my nominee for a Perry word of wisdom. If this crazy world of ours isn't to become unglued, we'll all have to face our need for one another. I'm glad the Perry train is rolling again and can't wait for the next insightful theme to drop. Thanks so much for the fun and joy you bring to this effort. End quote. I thought that quotation was a good one too, Tom. It was great to hear from you. As always, I'd love to hear from any of you. Do you have a comment on the episode or the pod in general? Why don't you drop me a line at theperrypod@gmail.com. Next time, Perry finds himself playing a high-stakes game of follow the suitcase when a secretary's good intentions lead to deadly consequences. It's the first episode this season based on a Gardner novel. What happens in Vegas definitely doesn't stay in Vegas when murder's involved. It's the case of the shapely figure. Join us, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!